Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, How Komodo's Containment Technology Renders Malware Useless. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. First, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand following. Second, if at any time you have a question, please type it into the question chat box, and we'll have time at the end to review. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters, Rick Turner and Asaf Ashirov. Rick is a principal analyst on Ovum's IT security and technology team, specializing in cybersecurity technology trends, IT security, compliance, and call recording. He provides analysis and insight on market evolution and helps end users determine what type of technology and which vendor they should be pursuing. Rick has also worked on Ovum's financial services technology team with a specialization in capital market technology. Prior to joining Ovum, he worked as an IT journalist, specializing in networking and security, and as a foreign correspondent in Brazil, where he worked, among others, for the Financial Times and The Economist. Thank you, Rick, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Asaf Ashirov, Komodo's Cybersecurity Product Marketing Manager, overseeing endpoint protection, runtime application, self-protection security, and authentication product lines. Prior to joining the Komodo cybersecurity team, Asaf held various product-specific roles at companies such as Oracle, Sun Microsystems, and launched his own startup in the digital space. We're delighted to have you here with us today, Asaf. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Rick, let's get started with you. I'll turn things over.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Marie, and hello and welcome to everybody. So first of all, thank you for tuning in and listening to us today. Hope we can make this a worthwhile hour of your time. The agenda then, I wanted to talk a little bit, kind of set the scene, if you will, about what's really going on in cybersecurity at the moment. As you probably are aware, it's a fairly busy space for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that we are definitely seeing, we have been seeing for a number of years now, I'm calling it the demise of the signatures-based paradigm. I'll explain that a little bit better. Perhaps it would be a little fairer if I were to call it the waning efficacy of signatures in the security space. But the fact of the matter is they're on their gradual way out. They've got a few years to run yet. But in any case, I'll talk a little bit about that to begin with. And then what's happened as a result of that gradual decline in the usefulness of signatures, how the tech industry, the cybersecurity tech industry, has responded. There have been a variety of responses coming out of the industry, and how they've tried to address the challenges that are presented by signatures no longer being able to do what they did 15, 20 years ago. And then I'm going to hand things over a little bit to Asaf, who's going to talk more specifically about one of those responses, namely Komodo's, and that is, of course, the whole area of containment, which is, I'm looking forward to hearing myself, actually, because that's going to be some interesting stuff. But let's start at the beginning. Okay, what's going on in cybersecurity? I mean, this is a pretty straightforward slide, really. Basically, what I'm saying is that the industry has, in a sense, suffered something of a defeat over the last 20 years, in as much as it was quite common in the 1990s for security vendors to talk about preventing malware, preventing it getting in at all, preventing it ever hitting your network or your infrastructure or your endpoint or whatever. Nowadays, the best that they can do is talking about detecting, mitigating, and remediating. Now, that, in my book, is saying, okay, we know that the malware is going to get in. We know that the bad guys are going to get in, whether it be through malware or other forms of attack. We cannot stop them all at the gate. We can't prevent the lot from coming in. So since breach is in some form or another inevitable, we will do the next thing, which is to detect it, mitigate it as quickly as possible, and hopefully remediate it completely. That is a more conservative stance, shall we say, than 20 years back, and for some very good reasons. First of all, because back in the day, they were all based on signatures. In other words, what did you do? First thing you had was, and I'm not picking on any particular company here, but whichever antivirus vendor you were the customer of, if one of its customers was hit by something, that patient zero scenario, they would then take the malware that affected that person. They would develop, I'm calling it an antidote here, which is really just a signature. In other words, what does the bad code look like? Then they would immediately transmit that, disseminate it, as I'm saying here, to all of the other customers in their network, all the millions of people, which were all those things that we used to download every time we turned our computer on, whether it be at work or at home, and go away and have a cup of coffee eventually, because there were so many of them we needed to download, the signature updates, in other words. And of course, once we have those signatures, we could stop that stuff hitting us, because it had already hit the patient zero. Okay, there always had to be at least one person who was infected, but at least everybody else then was saved by virtue of the development of that signature. That was good, but way back in, an executive, largest security company, cybersecurity, IT security company, what you will, namely Symantec, went very public in the Wall Street Journal by saying that, look, signatures, we know that they're on the wane. We currently are catching, with our technology, this is in 2014, we are catching no more than 45% of the new malwares that are emerging on a daily basis. That number has continued to decline. Our best guess, our guesstimate, if you will, is that it's around 30% now. It may be lower for some vendors, it may be a little bit higher for others, but it's clearly not sufficient protection anymore. If you've got anywhere around 70% of new malware not being picked up by signatures, clearly signatures can no longer be considered to be the definitive answer in addressing malware and other forms of attack. Why? Well, some very good reasons for this, and this is why I'm saying I'm not picking on anybody here or suggesting that the industry, the defeat of the signatures-based industry was their own fault. There were also some very good reasons for this. First of all, the sheer, I'm calling them here malware threat actors. Let's call them threat actors more broadly. Nowadays, the whole world of threat actors has mushroomed beyond belief compared to 20 years ago. We now have, I'm calling here, I refer to them as criminal gangs. That's almost an understatement. These are criminal organizations. We're not talking about five guys with names like Lefty and Knuckles. We're talking about like entire organizations, hundreds of people sitting in very nice offices somewhere, developing malware and other forms of clever threats that they can attack us with for financial gain. Certainly not for kudos anymore. They're just doing this under the radar so that they can get some money from you in one form or another, or from your company or from somebody. And then, of course, we have the hacktivist community, more active perhaps in a few years ago, but they're still very much around. Think of folks like Anonymous, but there are a bunch of others. Some of them, these tend to be politically motivated. Some of these guys will be more on one particular issue. Others will be more general. Some it will be a general anti-capitalist stance. Others will attack particularly U.S. capitalism or anybody who's invaded their country in the last few years or whatever. So, I mean, there's a variety of reasons why people are doing hacktivism, but it can be just as lethal as the criminal guys. And then, of course, there are other state-sponsored groups. It's no secret that a number of countries around the world, both capitalist and otherwise, both commercial and otherwise, have government organizations which are dedicated to attacking other countries' infrastructure. And those guys, too, are perhaps some of the best funded, the most sophisticated, and the most difficult to withstand. So we're now seeing what were perhaps, I don't know, 20 years ago, 50, 100, 200 guys, I have no idea. But let's say they were certainly not in the millions. We are now reaching a point where hundreds of thousands of people around the globe are engaged in some form of criminal hacking activity against other networks elsewhere, whether they be corporate or government government organizations and government websites and networks that are being attacked. There's also an active market for malware on the dark web. What I mean by that is that nowadays, if you've got the right passwords to get onto the right sites in the dark web, you can go on and buy an exploit kit, a root kit, for pennies on the dollar. You can tweak it ever so slightly, change a few wordings and a few things about it, the way it acts, such that it is completely unrecognizable by any of the signature-based stuff that's out there. You can make it completely invisible and launch it, and you've basically probably spent no more than $10 to do so. And of course, there's the cloud, which means that nowadays you can, number one, you can test any changes that you've made to your malware by going away to somewhere like AWS and hiring a couple of hundred servers for an hour and putting a few things up there and just seeing if you can attack them and shred them. You can also use, in the case of, say, distributed denial of service attacks, you can now hire a huge botnet out there in the cloud and launch a massive attack against somebody's website, and you can just hire a botnet for an hour or a day or however long you particularly want to do it. So attacking has got a lot easier, and it's become much more of a business. And that's one of the reasons, really, why the signatures-based world is, well, it's flailing, really. And so what have been the responses that, to all of these changes and to this evolution in the threat landscape? Well, there's been a variety of technologies that have evolved in the last few years. I suppose this is basically the last decade, I'll say, more or less. Sandboxing was an early entrant in the market. And by this, I'm talking about network-based sandboxing. Of course, there were sandboxes just on individual machines long before that. But sandboxing as a network-based device that would be able to pick up stuff and allow controlled explosions, shall we say, of potentially bad stuff, was really hot for a while there. It enabled some companies to come to market with very large valuations as a result. We'll talk a bit about some of the shortcomings of that later, but in any case, beyond sandboxing, we've seen things like, and I apologize here for the alphabet soup, but this is not my abbreviations. These are things from a much bigger competitor, dear old Gartner, who came up with a couple of these little acronyms. So there's EDR, which is Endpoint Detection and Response. No surprises there. It means sitting something on your endpoint device and looking at activity that's going on there and seeing if you can detect something strange going on, and probably putting it up into the cloud, where you've got on the right there we have some machine learning. You might be doing some machine learning in the cloud on that activity on that device to say, this looks strange, let's take some response let's mount some response, let's take some remedial action, let's quarantine that device, let's run that code somewhere else in a sandbox to see what happens with it, let's stop it getting any access to anybody else, etc., etc. And then maybe even let's wipe the whole thing completely and start from scratch. The EDR community has become quite big in the last 3 years, I suppose, and those guys there's a bunch of companies that come out in that space and are doing some quite good business, for the simple reason that they are detecting and responding because they know that they can't prevent. So there's a lot of EDR activity in the market. I've also got this other one, it's a horrible name, UEBA, I apologize for that, User and Entity Behavioral Analysis. In other words, this is where you will deploy some technology, that watches the way that I work on my laptop and the kind of things that my laptop normally accesses in the corporate network. It looks at it and it learns what is normal. That means that you always deploy UAMA in a kind of a learning mode initially until it has got a picture of what constitutes normal for me, the end user, and for my machine. And I say my machine because it might not just be my laptop. It could also be a server in your data center, or indeed, I don't know, a server in your cloud environment. So in other words, it's not only endpoint, it's also the entities can be like servers within your entire infrastructure. But in any case, it will see what constitutes, it learns what constitutes normal, and then obviously it can detect abnormality. And once it flags the abnormality, then the defenders, if you like, the folks in the SOC analysts or whatever, the people on the security side will be able to see that anomaly and say, okay, we need to go and have a look at that. We need to go and see what's taking place here. If this is indeed an attack, it may be because it looks a bit strange. Rick has never tried to get onto the payroll database or see how much the CEO of the company is earning or something like that. So it's strange. Okay. There are other things. There's isolation technology. This is an interesting one because it actually kind of says, look, I'm not even going to try to detect and respond. I'm not going to waste my time like that. What I'm going to do is on this, let's say on a given laptop, I will set up in virtual machines every session, every time that Rick goes onto the internet and looks at page 1, 2, 3 or whatever he looks at, that session will be contained within a virtual instance, a virtual machine on his laptop. So it can get as infected as he likes. He can go to websites that are downloading all kinds of nasty stuff, and clever malware can be in that session, but it's isolated. So it can't get to my operating system. It can't get to my BIOS. It can't get out of that kind of holding pen, if you like. And what happens, of course, is that as soon as that session ends, let's say I close that page, or I close down the computer. But let's say all I do is close down that page and I'm staying elsewhere on my computer, but I'm not looking any longer at that particular website. I click on it to close it, end of story. It's that session has ended. I've killed the infrastructure that I spun up in order to look at that page. So whatever has infected that particular session cannot get out, and it's dead as a doornail. So it's kind of a good security approach, an interesting one, if you will, in as much as it no longer requires any of this detection response going on elsewhere. And then, of course, there's deception. Now, deception's also been around for a very long time. I mean, they used to just refer to things like honeypots, which were, well, they go back to 20, 25 years. It's moved on quite a bit. There are people now who have basically developed, companies, who have developed entire infrastructures whereby you've got a central console from which you can now deploy multiple different types of what they collectively refer to as deceptions, plural, and these can be everything from just breadcrumbs, which is just a dumb Word document that looks like it's important that someone might try to steal, but is actually rubbish. But it can be always from breadcrumbs all the way through to quite sophisticated dummy applications that the attacker can interact with. They talk about high interaction decoys, these things, whereby you can actually see all what he's trying to do with that application. So these at this high end of decoys or deceptions. And of course, also because they're clever and they know that, oh, that looks like it might be a decoy, they have to continue to refresh them. So you can do all that from a central console, and you can refresh all of your estate of decoys and breadcrumbs and everything else, so that it looks completely different every half an hour or something, or however frequently you want to refresh it. So that's also an interesting technology. Number one, it's helping to waste the time and make more expensive any attack on your infrastructure, because the guy gets in and he may spend half a day or something wandering around in these meaningless deception documents and applications that you've got scattered around your network. He can't find the real stuff, but he's found all of this rubbish, and he spends time and therefore also money. And time is money, and therefore he probably says, if he gets fed up, hopefully he'll go away altogether and attack somebody else. So there's that aspect of deception. But of course, there's also the aspect of deception that while the attacker is in the dummy, if you like, or the bogus environment that you have deployed on your network, you can watch what he's doing, particularly if it's a high interaction decoy, and you can actually see what he's trying to achieve, which gives you further detection capabilities. So think of deception not only as a time waster for the bad guys, but also as a way for you to actually find out more about them as well. And I think deception increasingly we'll start to see moving in with some of the other technologies that I saw on the earlier slide there as a kind of an enhancement to detection capabilities. Now, all of those lead me to the other thing that's crept up on us over the last decade, but let's say 5 years anyway, where it's really gotten to become something of a crescendo, is threat intelligence. Now, threat intelligence is not a technology, nor even a tech response, truly. What it really is an information source. In other words, more and more people are now coming to market, whether you have to pay for it, whether you get it free because you're a member of a given organization, or whether it's free because you've bought my box and so you get all the benefit of my threat intelligence that I feed to that box. I mean, those are the three models that I see most commonly in the market. But in any case, what threat intelligence is essentially this. Since I cannot possibly tell you the name of the guy who's going to try to break into your house tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you every photograph and every bio of every housebreaker that we know on the planet, and hopefully I'll be able to make it more relevant by saying, but we know that the housebreakers that are particularly active in your region are these guys, and of these guys we know that 40% of them, at least 40 of that 100, are actually not in jail at the moment, so may well be able to break in tonight. So in other words, it's giving you relevant information about threats that you can then use, assuming you can, you have the intelligence, you have the infrastructure to be able to take advantage of it, so that you can actually then say, okay, let's get ready for this stuff, what's going to be coming at us. And I've just put on there a couple more of these acronyms. I apologize. TIP is a threat intelligence platform, which is really just the way that you aggregate a lot of this threat intel that's coming into you, and the way that you can try and kind of start manipulating it and making use of it. Threat intelligence gateway is the step beyond that, where you take the stuff from the tip, if you like, and actually start saying, okay, now let's activate our response to all of this threat by saying, okay, let's prepare all of our firewalls, for argument's sake, to be prepared for when these guys are coming, because it's going to look a bit like this. So those are the kind of this is the tech bit on the side there, the tips and the tigs, which are responding to this explosion in threat intelligence in various forms around the market. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But with that, I'd like to stop talking, because you're probably fed up with my voice. And I'm going to bring in Asaf, who's going to give you much greater detail about Komodo's quite interesting, slightly different approach to the whole business of defending against malware, like the non-file-based attacks, and it's called containment. So at that point, Asaf, it's over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rick, for that insightful overview. So now I'll just jump right in and talk about containment and Komodo's advanced endpoint protection. So after 20 years as a leader in the online security market, we have met with numerous IT and security leaders from global organizations of all sizes that we work with, and they all shared with us their biggest challenge in defending their organization against multi-billion-dollar crime syndicates and nation states that produce and have access to the most sophisticated malware that they know their current generation of solutions aren't necessarily capable of detecting or preventing from entering their networks. Now I just want to acknowledge the fact that it has been proven mathematically that you can't prevent all malware from entering your network. We need to first define what is malware, and in its purest form, malware is legitimate code that has entered your network to do illegitimate things to your environment. The industry leaders we spoke with have concluded that since they can't detect and prevent malware from entering their network, they will get breached. We've done research and found that the average cost of a malware breach is approximately $3.7 million, according to studies done by IBM. And we continue to see the problem getting worse every day in the news. So again, let's be clear. Komodo does not prevent malware from getting into your network. However, Komodo has an impeccable track record of rendering malware useless once it tries to execute inside your network. So what does this all mean? So think about fire without oxygen. It cannot do damage and therefore will not survive. So what is the equivalent of oxygen to malware? Is the ability to write to the hard drive, write to the registry, and write to the COM interface. Therefore, Komodo has a patented approach to virtualizing and isolating the hard drive, registry, and COM interface that malware is by default allowed to write to. So let's now dive into how we're able to accomplish this by walking through a general use case where various file types get executed on an endpoint that is secured by Komodo's advanced endpoint protection. So if you get a bad file and we've checked it against our blacklist and we can definitely prove that it is malicious, we'll stop it and prevent it from running it there and then. Now, when we get a good file, and again, I want to underline the fact that a good file doesn't necessarily mean it's not on the blacklist. It means that we have checked it against a whitelist to make sure it is indeed a known good file. We let it run. We let it run without doing anything to it, so that it can execute all its processes as needed. Now, the interesting thing is the third file type, right? The one that we don't necessarily know of, and those are considered and classified to be as unknown file types. Most malware and malicious files start their life as an unknown file. So these are the ones that most organizations should be on the lookout for. And what we do with these files, with these unknown files, is we use the isolated technology. We use the intelligent automatic containment, and we wrap it in a intelligent, what we call intelligent auto-containment. It is able to run in a lightweight environment, and in parallel while it's running, with no impact to productivity, because it is such a lightweight piece of software. The user is able to actually access it. And for example, if it was a Word document, they would be able to get into it and read it, even if it did happen to be a malicious file. Now, while all this is happening, we automatically send this file to our machine learning engine, what we call Valkyrie Verdict, where the file gets analyzed statically and dynamically to figure out if it is indeed a known good or essentially and eventually a known bad file. Now, we're able to do this in for about 45 seconds on average for 95% of the times. That's 5 times faster than than most industry norms. And for the other 5%, for more complicated code bases, we're able to accomplish this for up to 5 hours. And this is because we bring in actual human experts who are able to slice and dice the file to determine actual final verdict, so that it's no longer questionable, and so that we can give a final 100% verdict. So there are three key things I want all of you to walk away with today after seeing this high-level walkthrough of our patented intelligent automatic containment. Number one, AAP contains unknown files and runs them in a lightweight environment, all without compromising usability or productivity. Two, all files are automated locally and globally, achieving an analysis for a 100% verdict for 100% of the time. And this is important to understand. And number three, every verdict impacts Komodo's 86 million endpoint platform. This means that if you were to execute an unknown file, such as I just spoke to earlier, in containment, then Valkyrie was able to determine that the file is indeed malicious. All 86 million endpoints are instantly updated to disallow this file type to ever run in the future. So now let's just take a couple of minutes to review what is included with the advanced endpoint protection solution. Number one, we have Komodo 1, that's the underlying IT operating platform that runs ITSM, which I'll get to later, and other relevant IT management tools in a single pane of glass view. We also have Information Technology and Security Manager, long for ITSM. It's our single consolidated dashboard that provides an administration for all related endpoints by enabling IT admins to configure and provision security policies. Three, Komodo Client Security, that's the application that is installed on the endpoint and is able to achieve containment via the demonstration I showed earlier. And then last but not least, Valkyrie Verdict, that's the cloud-delivered decision engine that receives these unknown file types to do static and dynamic, and if need be, human expert analysis by leveraging machine learning and artificial intelligence technology. So to conclude my presentation, I'm excited to announce that we created a tool that will allow you to scan selected endpoints on your network to find potentially malicious files. This tool is absolutely free. It's easy to use, it's lightweight, and I urge everyone to take advantage of this opportunity by signing up today. You can find the link in the chat section. We will also be sending an email following this webinar that will guide you to the sign-up page. Thank you very much for attending. We'll now open up the lines for any questions.
Great, thank you, Asaf. Let's go to our questions from the audience. There's one that we just got, Asaf, that you could probably address regarding the free malware scan.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, I just lost it. What is the process and how long does it take to get my system scanned for malware?
Yeah, sure. So that's a good question. So the way it works is essentially you would go onto a webpage of ours, enterprise.komodo.com/free forensic analysis. Again, we'll be sending out the link to you, and from there you can submit. I think we only ask two questions, very basic information, your email and then your phone number, and I'll explain why we need your phone number in a few minutes. Once you submit this information, you automatically get instant download there and then of the executable file, which is basically the installer for this forensic analysis tool. Once you install it, you can run a scan. We offer 4 scan types. You can do a scan on your single endpoint, so your Windows-based device. You can do a scan on an Active Directory. You can do one by selecting, the specific network addresses, or you can do one. This is one of the ones that we recommend, an actual work group. So it depends on what your network environment is like. We urge everyone to scan all the endpoints that are running on your organization's environment, just so you're able to really sift through and find out what's going on. Now, the scan itself typically takes If you opt for a quick scan, which I also recommend, that basically tells the tool to look into specific paths within the endpoint where that are commonly found to include malicious files. That takes up to typically on average and maximum 15 minutes. Now the great thing about this program is that after you sign up, and going back to why we ask for your phone number, is that we will have one of our specialists actually call you and assist you with the scanning process itself. And this is all free of charge. This is just a service that we offer at Komodo. So again, I urge everybody to take advantage of it today.
Great, thank you. And I see the link to go to the free forensic analysis is in the audience announcement on the platform. So everyone can take a look and click on that link below. Next question is for Rick. Are there any shortcomings of the technical responses to the decline of signatures you mentioned? And can these new responses be combined for broader coverage?
Okay, well, yeah, certainly there have been a number of shortcomings highlighted by in the years since these folks have been popping up. I suppose the one that is probably best known is Sandboxes, which looked like they were going to be the universal panacea and were going to answer all the questions that we needed to ask about life after signatures for a while there. However, not surprisingly, given the almost universal deployment of sandboxes, particularly in sectors such as the financial sector, where a lot of the big banks on Wall Street and in the City of London and so forth deployed this kind of stuff, effectively what happened was that the guys who were writing the malware became savvy enough that their malware could start to detect that it was sitting in a sandbox. So in other words, since the sandbox depended upon looking as much like a real environment as possible so that it could think it was in the wild and attack you, what they did was they made their malware look around and say, hang on, is this really the actual production environment of the target, or is it in fact a sandbox where I'm sitting and nothing is, and I'm not going to be able to affect anything in this environment outside of this sandbox? One of the things that they would do, quite simply, is they would make their malware do nothing for upwards of 10, 15 minutes or something, and if it sat there dormant, doing absolutely nothing, the sandbox would ultimately say, "Oh well, good, that's fine. No, that's doing nothing wrong. Okay, pass it on, let it out into the wild." That was one very simple way. Was just to sort of delay the activity of the malware beyond when it was first installed. So just for it to lay dormant, as I say. But there are many other tricks that it would use, and it became very complicated, therefore, for sandboxes to necessarily work on all malware as the malware got savvier and became malware, I think they call it sandbox aware. And so they call it sandbox evasion techniques. So that's one of the technologies that has been combated by ever more intelligent forms of malware. The isolation technology, which I spoke about and was quite sort of complimentary about earlier on, I do like the approach. I think it's a very elegant approach in as much as it doesn't involve a lot of detection technology and lots of analysis to see whether something is good or bad. You just don't care because it can't do any harm, so you allow it to run as much as it wants. Because it's not going to get out of that little containment area that you've created for it in the isolation environment. The problem with that is if you do it on the endpoint, which one or two vendors do, is that it only works on, well, number one, it is quite compute intensive. In other words, it actually does take up quite a few cycles of your processors to actually operate, because it's quite a sophisticated little system that you are creating on the laptop, shall we say. But number two, it not only is it computer intensive, but it also only works on more recent editions of whether it's Intel or AMD chips, which effectively means that if you've got a mixed environment of, I don't know, you've got 10,000 laptops in your environment and only 6,000 of them are running on basically V3 and up. If you've got a lot of older stuff that's sitting around and that is running older versions of those chipsets, it won't work on them. So it then becomes a partial solution, and you've got to think what you're going to do on the other ones. Now you might say, well, but they're not such a problem, they're not such a target. But of course they are, and if they are targets that you cannot defend using isolation, then you've got kind of isolation over here in one part of your estate, and you've got to do something else for the rest of your estate. So it was a bit of an operational overhead as well, and potentially a bit of a headache. That's a couple of the things that occur to me right up front. I mean, in terms of the other responses that I've spoken about, obviously one of the challenges is that things like user and event behavior analysis and to some extent EDR, they kind of require a fairly sophisticated team to actually run them and understand what the output of those systems is. In other words, unless you have a sizable security team and some folks on board who are specialists and know what they're doing, it might prove a bit too complicated for you. And I keep saying to the EDR vendors, can you go down market and make it simpler? What I'm starting to see nowadays is that some of the EDR technology is now being deployed, or being offered, I should say, as a managed service and called MDR, for managed detection and response. I think that has the promise of expanding out into the broader enterprise community, where and mid-sized companies, maybe even all the way down to SMB, where there won't be necessarily all the sophistication or indeed all the resources on-prem to be able to actually use this technology themselves, but where they will still gain benefits if they've got a decent MSSP or somebody who's offering an MDR service. So that's some of the things that I've seen in terms of shortcomings and issues around adoption of these new technologies.
Okay, excellent. We have another question. Asaf, this is probably a good one for you. Can you please explain how the unknown file is usable yet isolated at the same time prior to AI Valkyrie verdict being passed down?
Okay, so that's a good question. So I think to paraphrase, I think it's the attendee is asking how we're able to run the file while at the same time being able to analyze it in the cloud. And so the answer to that is, because we're using this intelligent automatic containment, and it is indeed a restricted, lightweight, limited use type of environment where it's essentially, virtualization that lets us execute the file and install it as needs be. We're not really impacting the actual native device, right? Now, when this is done, we let it run, but we're taking another version of it and we're sending it up to the cloud, where the static and dynamic analysis is done, hence machine learning and artificial intelligence. And if need be, because we always want to get that 100% verdict 100% of the time, we will bring in human expert analysts to take a look at the file if that ML/AI technology can't determine a final verdict. So the answer, I guess, at a high level to that question is we're just, we're letting it run virtualized, again, very lightweight environment that has no impact to productivity or usability. And while this is being done, we're sending a copy of this file to the cloud to get a final verdict. And then, if it's clean If it's benign, then we will take it out of containment and we'll let it run locally. If it's bad, then we'll stop it and we'll notify the end user, and we won't let it run.
Okay. Okay, a similar question came in too. The question is, what exactly happens to unknown files that are sent to the machine learning cloud engine, which I think that you just addressed?
Yeah, so again, right, it's three general things, right? We have the static analysis, we have the dynamic analysis, which is, again, this is our part of the machine learning AI technology. And then we have the human expert analysis that's done. And then, again, it takes up to 45 seconds most of the time, up to 95% of the cases. And then for the remaining 5%, when we do bring in human experts, that can take up to 4 hours.
And can I have a quick question there for Asaf, if I may, just follow up on that, because I'm interested. You used the example of a Word document that someone has received, maybe as an attachment in an email, which and if it is suspect, you've put it into containment. So your end user in the organization would be able to read that document, but would they, I presume with containment, they would not, for instance, be able to save it to their hard drive, nor would they be able necessarily to make changes to it and save it on their hard drive. Would that be it?
Yeah, so it totally depends on the file, right? And the Word document that I brought in was just, an example that came to mind as I was speaking to this. So they are able to read it in that lightweight environment, but they're not able to do things that go, like maybe I'll give you another different example. They won't be able to copy something out of there and then put it into a native device. So to your question, they won't. It depends on the file type. From what I know, a Word document would fall into the category that they won't necessarily be able to save edits within the file, and then save it locally, right? They'll be able to save it within the containment environment, but not local to their machine.
Got it.
Okay. So a question just came in to carry on this discussion. The question is, so if I have a Word document, I am allowed to execute it locally before it's been through static and dynamic analysis?
So a Word document would not. So if we determine, so let me put it this way, right? So if it's determined to be unknown file, meaning we looked at the hash, or we looked at the digital signature, and we looked at all these other predefined criteria, and we check it against our blacklist and against our whitelist, and it's nowhere to be found, then we categorize that as an unknown file. So if we categorize that as an unknown file, therefore it will run in containment until we get a definitive verdict back.
Okay. At this point, we don't have any other questions in our queue, so I would like to take this opportunity to thank our presenters, Rick Turner, Asaf Ashirov, for presenting today, and also all of our webinar attendees. Thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. We will be sending a follow-up email with information for you to keep this conversation going around malware containment. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, visit us online, and we look forward to seeing you on our next set of webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.